Good morning and welcome to...
Hang on.
Jesus.
We've started. No, don't.
No.
We've started.
It's not live yet.
It is.
Now.
Good morning and welcome to Galway Politics Live. And this morning, as well as my co-host Neil Bullockon, I'm delighted to welcome two newly elected TDs who were going to be entering the 33rd Dáil. They did it last Thursday, by the way. Eamon of Cuív of Fianna Fáil and Maireád Farrell of Sinn Féin. So over to you, Neil.
Yeah, well, I mean, firstly, welcome to you both and congratulations on getting elected because, as you know, Eamon, it's not an easy task. Maireád, how do you feel? I mean, there you were sort of...
I definitely know it wasn't an easy task after losing in May, yeah.
You lost town council and you got elected. How do you feel?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, for me, it's very much a situation. I know how easy it is to lose, and that, to me, in a lot of senses, I know that it's a bit of a swing vote towards ourselves, and now it's up to me, I suppose, to try and maintain that as much as possible, especially here locally. And then obviously on a national scale, I think that's then up to the national leadership. I can't take blame for that. So I think that'll be my focus really now, is obviously to try and get an office set up, try and get myself set up as best as possible, and to try and hit the ground running, I suppose.
Yeah, and you're feeling optimistic about what you can do for Galway?
Well, look, I think so. I mean, I think if you go into an election, especially after having lost a few months previously, you know, you need a bit of optimism. So, yeah, I think so. And I think that, like, obviously for me, it was very good to see such a strong support for Sinn Féin nationally, and particularly then as well, my friend Claire Curran got elected in Roscommon, Galway, which is good as well, because then it's nice to kind of, I suppose, have a colleague who's in the same county as yourself as well. And similar age in that. So, yeah, look, I look forward to working with her as well.
Very good. And what about you, Eamon? Are you not bored at this stage of topping the poll and getting elected first in Galway West?
I remember, Neil, I lost 3 elections. I lost a local election and 2 general elections.
Yeah.
And it was a hard struggle to get into politics, I'll have to be honest with you. And I suppose that hardened me in terms of making me absolutely determined to work for people once I got in. The other thing that I think is, if you don't keep that eternal optimism and keep seeing new challenges ahead and new things you want to change, well, then you can't really keep doing the job. On the other hand, you do realise that an awful lot of often unnecessary, or what should be unnecessary work, can often go into bringing change about. So you need a great stamina to keep pursuing issues that you're frustrated with, but that don't happen as fast as they should happen, that you just have no answer to that, but to keep grinding away until you're forced to change. And I can give endless examples of this in my time in politics, kind of no-brainers. I think the best one, we still haven't managed to deliver it. When I was in the department, we had all the planning done for a peer in a seer. But I remember when we went into opposition, I pursued this issue. I got what I think was to be the best answer ever from the Department of Finance. They told me they just built a pier, which I had been involved in Inishmore, and that would do the people of Innisir. Now, when you're faced with that kind of challenge, and if I might say ignorance, it does make you totally frustrated, but to a certain extent it galvanises me to just keep pursuing and keep pursuing. But there's no question about it, and I think the public identified this. Change is happening way too slowly in Ireland. We get entrenched in the most ridiculous things that were there maybe in the past for some reason, but are totally outdated. And we just do not seem to be able to move forward on very, very straightforward things. I was listening to the radio on the way in, and somebody mentioned the word competence, just getting the job done. A lot of it's not ideological. If you say, I want to put broadband into everybody's house, there's no great ideology in that. No, it does have a huge effect, for example, in climate change, amazing, because lots of people could work from home and could take a lot of commuting out. It could have a big effect on traffic and so on. But in itself, it's not a very ideological thing to do. To provide good bus services and low bus fares isn't very ideological. It's just kind of common sense. Yeah. But again, we seem to hit interminable walls with all sorts of authorities that are meant to be there to provide all these excellent services. And amazingly, the more we bring in experts and reports and so on,
the less gets done.
Well, the less obvious things get done. And I often, looking back at the downturn in the economy, think that there was so much micro-analysis that nobody stood back and said, well, hang a second, if all of Central Europe pours money into all the peripheral countries, something's going to go wrong. It has to. So they didn't look at the macro. They keep looking at so much of the micro. It's like looking into the engine of your car and wonder why it's not going, but not being able to see the big picture.
So
Well, you made some great points there, the two of you. But what I picked up on, and it's a great sense of encouragement to the younger voters, is that both of you guys didn't win every election. As you say yourself, the first couple you lost. Maireád, you came back very strong from May. And I think we're trying to get younger people to become more involved in politics, which I'm not happy they still aren't, and I still think that vote could go up. But I just like to say that that's a good point where you don't give up. You keep going out and you keep fighting and you have a lot of beliefs.
Well, look, I mean, I think with younger people, I assume Eamon's the same as me.
yeah, he's a young person too. That's true.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I don't feel young anymore. I feel withered after last year. But anyway, no. But I think with younger people getting, like, I mean, I'm sure you were the same. I was interested in politics from very young. Young teenager, and I think that came from my interest in history and that.
Yeah.
So I basically really what happened was one day in English class we read Pádraig Pearse's we had to read inspirational speeches, and we read Pádraig Pearse's oration, and I started reading then, and then I kept going and read on more and more and more, and obviously history is basically politics and all that kind of thing, and then that got me interested in politics, and then I joined Sinn Féin when I was 18 because my mother said I had to do my leaving cert first. And she was dead right.
Wise mother.
Yeah, no, she is dead right, because there was no point getting politically active and then not focusing on my leaving cert. But I think if young people are interested in politics, it's just to make sure that you find out what you actually are interested in and find the political party that suits you, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And then because it's about changing the society to the way that you would like to see it, and that's what keeps you going, because you believe that your party or your ideology or whatever is will change things for the better. So really, I think for young people, it's that it's more about getting involved.
The whole thing, of course,
Like
is history, as you mentioned, Maireád. And I mean, I felt in the
Yeah.
last few years, history on the syllabus was being dumbed down, and they wanted to take it out of being.
They've made it compulsory,
It's made it
haven't they?
compulsory, which is very, very good.
Well,
very
that was
positive.
really good, because in my I went to Clutch and Curb, and there was only 30 people in my year, so I was the only person who wanted to do history for leaving cert. So
Really?
obviously then they couldn't put it on, so I didn't get to do history for leaving cert, although that's what I wanted to study, and I did study it then as well, which I think is a real pity. And then you have, and as a result, then you have people who don't know about the 1916 Rising. I remember people in my class in school didn't know about that, and like that's what you think is very basic history to understand. But the reality is, if you don't teach people that, you can't expect people to really know what it is, or it's some obscure concept that they don't know about. And people have different interests, so that's obviously totally fine. But I mean, I do think that kind of a basic level of historical knowledge is
Should be
very
there.
important. Yeah.
And what would you think, Eamon?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, history, is hugely important, and understanding it and not taking the simplistic view. Of course, my own father was a professional historian. He was a Celtic Studies scholar. Would have been very, very knowledgeable professionally. Wrote articles, etc., on the revival period, because it's intertwined, obviously, with the Irish language. He was also an expert in medieval history and so on. But he was always very, you couldn't say anything, just that's the way it was. He'd make you analyse it and work out, and he'd often point out to you that it wasn't that simple. And then, of course, we had a good opportunity of asking my grandfather De Valera questions. And, questions we asked him. I can remember one day we asked him, which would be a fairly sticky question. He was quite a stickler for protocol, as most people would appreciate. So we asked him, why did he not obey the countermanding order in 1916, since the president of the volunteers was Owen MacNeill.
That's right.
Now, he did give us an answer. He said we were in an army, and that the order to him issued from MacDonagh to go out, and that he was his commanding officer, and where MacDonagh got his order was a question for MacDonagh and the seniors. I think in reality he felt they should go out, but he could see the other argument. But it was interesting, like, there was no inhibitions on our point. I remember my sister challenging him one time about the whole issue of the oath, and he gave a really detailed description of what happened the day they went into the Dáil, and how he hadn't taken the Bible and he put it at the other end of the room, and how he wrote Nemo J. Shaw and just signed the book and walked in. Now, obviously,
Did you write again, Eamon?
you see, he wrote Nemo J. Shaw, this isn't an oath.
Yeah. Oh, very good.
Right?
Yeah.
Didn't take the oath, didn't take the Bible's hand, put the Bible in at the other end of the room. But what I'm saying is, it wasn't a question that if he did it was right. Certainly, neither he nor at home were things taken on critically. And, we were at a debate the other night in Conor at the Ardesh, and one of my colleague said Eamon Cuív was, gur fáis was Fianna Fáil, that we were kind of born into Fianna Fáil. And I said that's not actually true when I was growing up.
You made a choice.
Well, I made a choice, but not only that, but there would have been open criticism of things that Fianna Fáil were doing when I was growing up. But that was there, and thankfully it was there. How I got into politics was a different way, really, because when I went to college, I was more involved in the Irish language, and then I was running Caileys in the Manch House in Dublin and all sorts of things. And when I did a science degree, and when I left college, I decided I didn't want to become an academic in science. I wouldn't be that good at it anyway. So when I had my degree, I decided I wanted to come down here to the west of Ireland, and I got a job in a cooperative. In the beginning, there was myself, a committee, and £3,500. And the objective of that was to try...
Connemara.
Yeah, back in where I still live in Cornamona.
Yeah.
And I was there for 18 years. And we were trying to develop industry, employment, agriculture, the whole economy of the area and the whole social life in the Irish language and so on. And it was like a mini state in the end of the day, because the role of the co-op was at a community level to develop all aspects of the community and try to stabilise the population and so on. That inevitably led you to politics, because you kept coming up against state policies that were holding you down. So this idea that I said, I must get into politics, I must join Fianna Fáil, I was actually doing the job
You
on
were
the
coming
ground.
from the ground up.
I was coming from the ground up, and I was doing the job on the ground. We had quite reasonable success, but I kept saying the state is standing in the way instead of helping. Now, there were some very good elements, and one thing that was brilliant, and I wish we could get back to it, dealing with Rinne Gaeltachta in those days, the Department of Gaeltacht was an absolute joy, very little paperwork, a very, very adventurous attitude, and if things failed, they didn't close you down. They helped you out, and we went again. And there's now 200 jobs, where there were no jobs, and I think that justifies all of the investment they made, which in hindsight, in historical sight, looks tiny. But that kind of
It's certainly a very big thing in rural part of Ireland.
And a very, very rural part.
That number of jobs.
But I mean, the entrepreneurial and the forgiveness for mistakes, and of course I was only 23 at the time when I started, would put to shame the attitude we have now, and the caution now. And we didn't have to write all these huge business plans.
So bureaucracy is something you'd say is kind of...
bureaucracy has gone absolutely crazy, and the resistance to change or taking any risk or allowing any failure. And one thing you would see if you look at, for example, California, and there are lots of things wrong with America, but you have to look what's right too, is their acceptance of failure, and you start again and you keep coming.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, Maireád, what do you think? I mean, do you think this sort of ground up way of doing things and sort of working sort of initially for the people is something you'd encourage in the sort of new Dáil or the new politics that we're seeing at the moment?
Well, just one thing that just interesting what Eamon said there about he kind of went into politics that way. I think most people don't go, like I didn't join Sinn Féin thinking that I was going to run for election in any way, shape or form. It's just one of those things, like I was in Sinn Féin 6 years before I ran for election. It was just one of those things, we weren't that strong, so we didn't have that many people that we could pick to run. So then I think that's kind of how I ended up falling into it. But look, I definitely think so. I think we need to listen. Like, people often ask me, really specific, detailed questions about something. And realistically, it's the people who are living who are living through that experience who know best. So definitely, we need to have them. We need to listen more to people, because often they're the experts of it.
Well, just an example, I was doing a clinic yesterday, because obviously I don't have to reset up the office.
Yeah, you're very lucky.
I'm very lucky.
Very lucky.
So
my biggest problem is, hiring somebody without knowing for sure that there's not going to be an election.
It's a huge chance,
that's a big thing, because
massive
job,
getting an office, setting it up, hiring staff.
Yeah.
And remember, when you're hiring staff, you're hiring your future.
Exactly.
And
their future.
That's a huge... But I think I came across the best example, and I have some absolute beauties, of just how crazy this country's got. Somebody came in to see me yesterday, and they have been reviewed for the medical card. So we'll say the income was, we'll just say a figure of €300 a week. They had a medical card up to now. The medical card runs to the end of the month. Married couple. And they refused the card. Sorry, it includes a little bit higher than that. We say €500 a week.
Yeah.
But
Well,
€500 a week, no,
whatever
there's a
it
reason
was,
for this,
yeah.
why you want to put a figure. Say €500 a week between the couple, so the two,
Okay.
state pension, whatever, and a
Not
little
a lot
bit
of
of
money.
more. Not a huge amount of money. But the person involved is going to be 70 at the end of March,
Okay.
1 month away. So they were reviewed it and taken the medical card
Right.
away for 1 month.
For
What?
For a month.
And all this review, and it took them months to get all the bits of
Yeah.
paper and the tax returns and all the rest of it
Yeah.
to get it, to find out that in fact all this money was wasted.
So they probably wasted more money.
Well, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
What you will find is, I asked this question years ago, 96% of the people over 66 who ever reviewed the medical card, there is no change, because very few people's income goes up
Yeah.
once they go to over 66. And we're doing this, they give the medical card for 5 years and then they come back and they review it. But in this case it was utterly ridiculous, because the person is automatically entitled to the medical card under 900. Remember, once you're under 900, right, euro a week for a couple is the limit for the medical card on the gross income, and they were, about half that.
Yeah.
And it's utterly ridiculous. But I'm finding my office is absolutely taken up with this kind of nonsense, and a very repressive, the operated public service being directed from the top. This does not come from the public service.
But when you say from the top, I mean, who
From
is
the
top?
attitude of government, because government should say,
Yeah.
will you please use common sense in applying rules? Will you please stop, justify why you keep reviewing people and causing particularly older people huge grief.
Now, in fairness,
Getting all this-
there's no politician who would stand over that I would have known. I mean,
But the government, the amount of reviews of welfare applicants and so on, older people, entitlements and so on that are going on are absolutely astronomical. And that, in the case of the Department of Social Welfare, that's coming from the Minister.
yeah.
The Minister's in charge.
It is coming from the minister, of course, but
and this is-
obviously, does the minister individually know much about
No,
that?
the Minister,
Well, the Minister
I was a
knows
Minister
about
in welfare. So you created an atmosphere. For example, when I was in Community Rural, we had a slogan virtually in the department that I kept coming back to. And I used watch it on the macro scale very carefully. And that is, if you think the Ombudsman would give it, just give it into the department.
Right.
Right? So some things are black and some things are white, but those ones that are grey.
Yeah.
Your test is, if you think...
that is what a lot of
No,
political science
interest-
is taken up with, grey stuff.
Interesting enough, I think at one stage, which I used to get them to report every month, just how many cases went to the Ombudsman, not the details of them, but how many cases against the department take the Ombudsman. I think over 1 3-year period, with one person raised an issue with the Ombudsman about a department's decision, because there were two things that we absolutely emphasised. Well, three things. A reasonably fast response, so people aren't hanging on forever, and you have to, in many cases, we've not to go to the Ombudsman on that issue. Second one is that all things being equal, and the amount of money involved in this is tiny,
Yeah.
that you take the same view the Ombudsman would take, which was a fair test, that you look at this in a sensible way and a human way as possible, and if it can be given, you give it. And when you did that, and the third one is, if you can't give it, you give an understandable, reasonable explanation why, under the rules, it cannot be done.
Okay.
Okay. That's
Now, can I just say to you both? I mean, what Eamon's describing is something frustration. Frustration of a politician, and there would be a view around at the moment that what people voted for in the most recent election is change. I mean, I wanted to check: is that something that you would both agree with? That people did vote for change? And I'd ask Maireád first. I mean, do you believe people voted for change, or do you feel they voted for?
Well, I think so.
something else?
I mean, I think the fact that we have the most number of TDs we've ever had, I mean, that would clearly indicate that people wanted something different.
Well, it's a change of party, but is it a change of the way things are done?
Yeah, I think so. I do think so. I think people have had enough, and I think that people want to see something different. And I think, I got very much at the doors. People were saying, well, we're not happy with the way things are now, so why not try something different? I do think so, and I do think that realistically, people do want to see some kind of a change of government, and the way things are done. I definitely think so, and I do hope that Sinn Féin can be a part of a government. We are very much on that footing that we would like to be part of the next government. Now, only time will tell on that. I find it ridiculous that Leo Varadkar says 1 minute that he's preparing for the opposition benches, and then the next minute he's being proposed for Taoiseach. that to me makes.
Is he being proposed for teacher?
He
Well,
was
he
proposed
proposed,
for
yeah, well,
teacher.
I mean, Eamon Ryan was proposed
Yeah.
for teacher.
I
as well.
understand that, but if you're
Richard
going,
Boyd Barrett the last time, I believe.
yeah, but I know at the end of the day, like, I mean, that's
Well, that's
muddying the waters.
the first day.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, like, I mean, at the end of the day, like, did I necessarily believe that he was really preparing for opposition? No, I didn't. But then, then the next
Well,
few
you
days
made a
later,
very good point,
he's-
Mairead, when we had the equality meeting in the Harbour Hotel, and we spoke about
No, I'm
government
thinking,
formation.
What did I say?
And what you said to me was, I was saying, well, Fianna Fáil have said they won't go in with Sinn Féin.
Yeah,
Fine Gael have said they won't go in with Sinn Féin.
yeah,
And you said to me, well, wait till the
yeah,
votes are cast, wait till
Yeah.
the seats, and then let's see what the mix is like.
yeah.
So I'm interested in that Sinn Féin are going to have a series of public rallies around the country. And I see you mentioned Varadkar there. Leo Varadkar made the point that Sinn Féin are kind of saying we should be in government, we won the popular vote, we got 25%, whereas Varadkar is saying but 75% didn't vote for Sinn Féin. So
Yeah,
what's
but-
your response be to that, Mairead?
Well, look, I think, yeah, of course, 75% didn't vote for Sinn Féin. That's totally fair enough. But I do think that for the first time, we have seen an increase in Sinn Féin seats. We've seen an increase in the Green seat. We've seen an increase in the Soc Dem seat. So I do think that there's there's an interest in change. I do think that, we've seen Leo Varadkar doesn't want to speak to us. Personally, I didn't understand, I actually genuinely don't understand Micheál Martin's saying that he didn't want to speak to us. But I just think that the obvious thing to have done would have been for Micheál Martin to turn around and say, yes, I'll speak to Sinn Féin, sit down with us, and then come out of the meeting and say, sure, I could never agree to anything on that. I think that would have at least,
meet anyway.
at least then it would have looked like he made the effort. He just doesn't agree with our policies or whatever it is,
Yeah.
and then moved on from that. I didn't fully understand why he came out beforehand and saying, sure, there's absolutely no way I can speak to Sinn Féin.
Okay, so a lot of the thing, if I can get this in Neil, about Micheál Martin is to talk about the Ard Corla and the Provisional Army Council. And I think there's a confusion
I know, but I
in the
think that's
public.
absolutely ridiculous.
But he's making that a big point.
I was there. I heard his speech, and his speech was more about Sinn Féin than it was about anything else.
Right.
And to me, that sounded, to be honest, like it was more about internal politics in Fianna Fáil than talking about anything else. I mean, why spend so much time talking about Sinn Féin? It's
I
a
know what
point
you're
of
saying, you're
embarrassment.
pushing one side,
But the
yeah.
thing is, that kind of talk is absolutely ridiculous. I'm 30. I've been in Sinn Féin since I'm 18. I've been on the Orcoria probably for most of my time in Sinn Féin.
Okay.
I think to try and not only that, but Mary Lou MacDonald, like her or not, is extremely capable, knows what she's on about. Pierce Doherty is extremely capable. Owen O'Brien is very capable as well. And to suggest that these people who are so capable and know their briefs are somehow that they're actually just listening to somebody else. They can't make up their own mind. Sure, look, they're just a bit.
What do you say to this report that came out? And
I think it's
you know,
absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Well, could you
And it
explain
does
to us,
annoy me.
Mairead, what's the difference between the Ard Corla, which you're on, and the Army Council? And
Well, first
what
of all, the
influence do
Army
they have?
Council doesn't exist. That's absolutely ridiculous.
So it doesn't exist at all.
Well, obviously, I've never been on an Army Council, but that is absolutely ridiculous to suggest that an Ard Corla that we have, every party has a national executive.
Right.
Yeah, that's
I used to work in a
that's
bank. I used to work in a bank.
Mhm.
That had a board of directors and that, you know what I mean? So every organisation has a group that has to come together to run it. That's just simple as. In the Ard Corla for Sinn Féin, people are elected from the Ardesh, people are elected from their Cuív. So
What's
it's
a Cuív?
Cuív is like basically we have it actually done by Midlands Northwest, so it's done by
it's
MEP
like a common
region.
decision.
It's well, no, you have your Cumann, then you have your Corla Canther, and then you have your Cuív. So that's for provinces.
Okay,
You
You know,
alright.
regional.
Regions,
So then it
regions,
means that
okay.
every region is properly represented, and you have that, and you come together every 4 to 6 weeks.
And that's what you're
And-
on, the Ard Corla.
Yeah, and then you just discuss
just
policies.
to clarify, because there'll be a lot of viewers watching today saying, God, what's the difference between an Ard Corla and an Army Council? Why did the press in the last few days keep going on about 7 people being in this Army Council?
Just to be very clear, right?
Yeah.
And you'll always see this.
Mhm.
When there's actually a threat of change, a proper fundamental change, the people that are in power will not want to see that happen, and they will throw everything they can to try and stop that happening. To suggest that the Ard Corla that I've been on for the last 12 years either I am firing from all cylinders, and neither is Mary Lou, Owen O'Brien and Piers Doherty.
Yeah.
I mean, to suggest that somehow we're under this spell and we don't understand that we're doing our own policies is absolutely ridiculous. And I just think, and to be honest, my taxi driver, I got a taxi over here,
Right.
he was telling me, he said he voted for Louis O'Hara in Galway East, and he's saying this stuff is just coming out and it just sounds absolutely ridiculous. And but also it's not right, because in my opinion it's reckless, and it's reckless. We have peace in the north, and I know exactly how important that is, coming from a family who have gone through the trauma of losing somebody during the most recent phase of conflict, and it was a hugely traumatic time for people, and people are still suffering the trauma as a result. So many families are, and we are now in a place where we have an assembly up and running. We have peace now. We do have threats from dissidents, and
Yeah.
that's extremely unfortunate, and it's particularly bad seeing what happened to Martin Finucane there last week. But the reality is, this peace isn't that new, and we shouldn't be playing politics with it. We shouldn't be firing up people to like I just.
Well,
Let's
just say-
not play politics.
No,
I want to
sorry.
come to Eamon, and
Yeah.
I particularly want to talk to you about change, because
No, can I just come back to this issue?
Yeah, do.
Because I think
Come back to this issue,
I
if you will.
think that we need to look at this in the round. Now, my involvement with the peace process during the 90s, I was hugely involved with visiting prisoners in the prisons of Britain and in the north of Ireland, and I meet some of those casually. One or two of them actually work for Sinn Féin, which is quite legitimate. Now, you have to understand what we said.
Yeah.
We said, would you forsake
We're being
violence?
Fianna Fáil now.
No, I'm saying everybody in government, everybody in the establishment in Ireland, right, said, would you forsake violence and go the political route?
Mm-hmm.
And we believe that if you do that, you'll be accepted in the political system. Now, we have to be honest and consistent with what's going on. Now, I then became a minister, so I was working with the North-South bodies, but I wasn't working with prisoners or whatever. And accidentally, I got involved again in 2011, working with the prisoners that are now in prison that relate to the distance. Now, the first thing I can say is there is no connection, zero connection, between the distance and Sinn Féin. And Sinn Féin know that, and I know that, but I know that from first hand.
Okay.
The second thing is that we have made quite considerable progress in the work we're doing. One group are on ceasefire since January 2018. Now, with that group, and my understanding is this happened previously, with that group we still liaise with people who have been participants. And you hope that they in turn liaise with the people who used to be involved. Because if issues arise and questions arise, you have to have somebody to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't, you're dealing with an individual. But it's an organisation you're trying to get to go the path of peace. And this is actually de facto accepted by people in authority, north and south in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Some other organisations, I would say, we haven't found the PSNI is so cooperative, but elements of the authorities down here have been very facilitating of this because they see we're on the road to peace. And this is what this is all about. Would there have been, my guess is that after 1992, 94 and into 98, that there were connections with people who had been associated with the IRA, who are still being used because they're connections into the public and because of the danger of somebody going rogue. This is always the challenge, and you need to be able to get information to deal with these issues, right? And remember, you have this combination, and I've been working with this in the last 2 years, and we've been meeting. We met the group that was set up in law to monitor all of this. Malik McWilliams is on it. There's Tim O'Connor and so on. One of
this group,
I can't think of the name. It's very long.
Okay.
But it's set up under legislation both in Ireland and in Britain.
Okay.
And the idea of it is to, see how we work away from paramilitarism within communities. And one of the issues that was interesting, there was a debate between us in that the threat was taken away from by some of the groups. And one group in particular that we were working with, a threat to security forces. But the issue was then raised that they might have been involved in internal punishment within their own communities. Now, this raises a very, very difficult issue because, let's be honest about it, if I go to any very deprived community anywhere in the world, there are, unfortunately, internal sanctions taken by groups against other groups. We see it in Dublin, nothing to do with the IRA and so on. So you're getting an overlacing of two different problems that we have to try to deal with. We deal with this maturely and honestly, and we try to work forward, and I have to say that I have no reason to doubt the bona fide of the people we work with. Now, if we don't do that, you can't build peace. So I think we're playing with fire at the moment. Now, I think also that statement that people are quoting from the PSNI has to be read very, very carefully, because it says they're not procuring arms, they're not training anybody and whatever, right? Now, this is over 25 years. This is over 25 years. But then it kind of says, this kind of statement, it is believed, right? Now,
it is believed by who?
Well, right, in cash, that the Army Council still is an influence in Sinn Féin. I don't know whether they have, but I utterly take Maireád Farrell's. And if they are, these people aren't young anymore and they're a long way removed from violence. But
well, there's an argument that Fine Gael, for example, and I'm going to leave Fianna Fáil out of it for the moment, there's an argument that Fine Gael is basically dancing to the tune of big business. I mean, there's an argument.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can say that
to the tune of the builders.
Well, you can make that
argument about Greens.
But what I'm saying is, you can make that argument about any party, and it's easy to throw mud. I remember when we were in government, and it was one that really annoyed me, because, and I think it nearly everybody threw it at us that. And I was on television programmes when the point was made that bankers and builders in Fianna Fáil cabinet, and I would just look at the present presenters in that circumstance and say, are you saying that I know any bankers or builders in any way of great friendship?
Or that you're influenced.
And then they'd always come back to me and say, no, Minister, because they knew immediately that they would be subject to legal proceedings, or they could be out, right? And they'd back off. But that is what the message was, that we were all there hobnobbing and making decisions for bankers and builders. I
must sort of put the question about the Irish people, because I don't think that the Irish people. Now, we hear this amongst the discourse on RTE, we hear this, on the national airwaves about this particular discussion we've been having here now. But I don't think when the people voted that was foremost in their minds. I mean, I think people voted for change because they were concerned about issues such as housing.
Exactly. But the issue, why it's so important at the moment, well, why it's so important personally to me, is we have been doing this slow, painstaking work. Yeah. The authorities here know all about everything I do, right? Yeah. We have interacted with the British Embassy, with the PSNI, with all the different authorities in the North. They're very reputable people who work on this work with me, and well known to society in general, and very well got in society North and South, but people who will stand up for the truth, even at times when it doesn't suit certain interests. The reality is, to undermine that work we're trying to do and not understand it is serious because of its consequences for peace. Now, let's put one question. Does anybody really think that if dissidents or anybody else really wanted to create havoc, that they couldn't? In other words, the only way of protecting ourselves in the modern world, and I have made this to many people, is that nobody wants to get you. Now, we have seen when other people want to use motor vehicles, lorries and whatever, to kill people, it's doable, right? So there isn't the ultimate security that most people think you get it by putting thousands of police and army and whatever there. The biggest security every one of us have in our daily lives is that we live in a society where you persuade everybody to abide by the rules of society, and that if they do that they will have a fair input into it, and you don't isolate any group. That is, I mean, the genesis of the problem in Northern Ireland was that one community were totally excluded from society.
Yeah. I'd put it to you, Eamon. I mean, the public have actually spoken. There's no question about that. The public have voted recently. And I strongly believe, talking to lots of people, that the public do not want another general election right now. They want a strong and stable government. It's difficult to do that with the sort of, what are effectively four power blocks. I mean, you've got Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, Sinn Féin, and then you've got sort of another grouping which is independents, Greens, and they're obviously minor power blocks, but it is effectively a big power block which is very fragmented, the fourth one, and it's actually the biggest power block, and it's actually the one which is kind of going to determine things, probably. But I'd be very concerned that there's a lot of posturing going on right now. The public have basically said that 22 years is long enough, in my view, to bring Sinn Féin into the process of potentially forming a government. Fianna Fáil, don't forget, are not that long in existence and had a similar history, probably, to Sinn Féin prior to the formation of the government. Fine Gael, obviously, their first leader was the chief of staff, I believe, of the Army Council of Sinn Féin, ultimately. Is it not time for us, after 22 years, to move on from this sort of discourse and look at the potential formation of government that might include Sinn Féin?
Well, just on who goes with whom. If you look back in time, that's a decision for each party. So for a long time, Fianna Fáil had a very simple policy that no matter how many seats they got, and they got many times nearly half the seats, that unless they were on their own, they wouldn't go into government. And that was their policy, and they're entitled to have that policy.
That was to do with power, though, as much as...
No, it was to do... Well, actually it wasn't. It was to do with coherence, that they believed that it was a more coherent government, and they were very...
Well, obviously a single party will be a more coherent government.
And what I'm saying is...
Probably not going to get it again.
No, but... So, the biggest... people who say the biggest party has to get into power are incorrect. Fianna Fáil voluntarily said, we ain't going into power, even though we were by far the biggest party, unless we're on our own. That was a legitimate position to have. So any party can have any position it wants about going in with any other party. And if Sinn Féin said tomorrow, since we didn't get, we wouldn't be by far the biggest party in the Dáil, we're not going into government at the moment, I'd respect that. So I think we all have to respect the position each party takes. Whether they're sensible positions or not are matters of debate within the parties. But we have to respect the right of people to engage or not engage with other parties. And there was a long time that I would have thought that Sinn Féin would not have been keen in engaging with either Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. And obviously they've changed their view. That's fair enough, and I respect that, utterly respect it. And if they said tomorrow, look, they've said clearly they want to go to government.
I respect that, Eamon.
And what I'm saying is, so what Fianna Fáil have said, Fianna Fáil has said that they will not go into government with Sinn Féin. That's the majority view. I have to accept that.
That's the majority of view within Fianna Fáil.
Within the parliamentary party.
Yeah. I accept that. That's absolutely... a party has to remain coherent. But at the same time, people will say that within Northern Ireland, Ian Paisley was prepared to go into government with Sinn Féin. Ultimately, he was prepared to do that. I mean, Maireád,
to me, it's.
What do you see?
It is obviously it's an internal party thing. I think it should probably be for most members rather than a parliamentary party. That's my personal view. But I think that I do think that what we see in the north, we see constantly over the last few years. Fine Gael telling us, that we need to speak to DUP, which we were happy to do, and we did nearly have an agreement previously, and then Arlene Foster couldn't get it through her own party, but now we have the Assembly back up and running, and we are willing to speak, and we work with the other parties in the north. But for the likes of Simon Coveney to come an hour down the road and then suddenly say, but I can't speak to Sinn Féin. I think it looks a bit immature in my own personal opinion. I think
is it
parties,
immaturity or is it just?
To me it's just it doesn't look like the grown up thing to do if you're looking at it from the outside. But again, that's up to every party. I think we've made it very clear that ideally we would like a coalition of the left, if that's possible. We have said that we would like to sit down with the other parties to see what we can agree on, to see what we could get through, because I think that I do think that, there's a lot of things that aren't working at the moment in the society that we live in. So clearly if we could all sit down and try and make some changes that will benefit people, I think that can only be a good thing. But if Fianna Fáil are saying that they don't want to speak to us, if Fine Gael are saying that they don't want to speak to us, I just find that with Fine Gael at the moment, it's just so... to me, they're playing games. This whole concept that at one stage they're saying they're going to go into opposition, but really it just seems like they want everything else to fail and that they're nearly forced into government. That's the view that I'm getting from them. But I think that realistically, I think people should sit down and talk. And if you talk and say you can't agree, that's 100%, that's fine. But I don't understand this concept of not even just sitting down, having the conversation and deciding then this isn't for me.
But surely the Good Friday Agreement was all about I suppose, bringing Sinn Féin into constitutional politics.
And look, I mean,
indeed the other parties.
we do also need to realise that Stormont is very different. The Assembly is very different to a normal functioning government in the south. What we have, it is a very different thing. I mean, it's a power sharing assembly and all that. So it is a very different thing. However, I do think that we should be moving towards a culture of people sitting down, having that conversation, and if we then say no, this won't work, then that's fair enough. But I do think people should be moving towards having a conversation.
Yeah, because Mary Lou MacDonald was in Fianna Fáil, was she not, at one stage?
No, Mary Lou MacDonald
was she never in Fianna Fáil?
No, she was never a member of Fianna Fáil.
She
was in, I mean, as we all went to college, the way you can be in any university society. I'm sure.
Society,
I think she may have attended a meeting or something. I wasn't around back then, but I think we were all. I'm sure if somebody found some sort of society that I was in my first year in college, I don't know how to explain it. I could have been in darts or something. Who knows? But who knows what I could have been.
You're not equating Fianna Fáil to a darts society.
No, but the reality is, look, I mean, societies.
My son one time won a bet. By trying and paying the euro to try and for the Guelph, but it made it into Phoenix.
Oh, did it? Oh no.
Lord.
Look, I mean, I think it'll be an interesting time. It's an interesting time ahead. Obviously, I really do hope that Sinn Féin can be part of the next government. That's what we want to do. People vote for you to be in government. They don't vote for you to be in opposition.
How long you have to form a government? I mean, was it 75
No,
years?
you have any length of time. Effectively, it's not laid on the Constitution.
Okay.
No, I think we have to. I think Mairead's made a very valid point.
Mm-hmm.
Constitutionally in the North, if you accept the Good Friday Agreement as being basically the Constitution of the North at the moment, it has to be power sharing.
Yeah.
Constitutionally down here, ours is all constructed on the basis that you have a government that can command a majority in the House. Mm-hmm. Now, how that works is, the government can get defeated on any motion as long as it's not money. Mm. But if you have a government that cannot put through money decisions, then it collapses constitutionally and you start all over again and it's over. So our system is predicated on the idea of having a government with a working majority if it's going to be anyway sustainable. It doesn't say how long we can take, but I think the reality is if after 2 months there's stalemate, and I've said this before, I think we have to then look at maybe getting a facilitator or something in to see is there any other way of cracking
Who would you
it.
have in mind for
I haven't any. Forget about names. Media people are always jumping forward.
Yeah,
that's where I am.
Who it would be? Yeah.
You
It's
get
not like you're going to get a George Mitchell or something like that.
Well, yeah, but they're native George Mitchells, or they mightn't all be male George Mitchells either. But you can
female
always
George Mitchell, excellent.
Yeah,
excellent.
So you can find
Georgina could be out there.
Georgina, exactly. You can find somebody suitable, and we could all have ideas in our mind, but until you get to that point, you don't address that point.
And what would they do? Would they chair something?
What they would be able to do is talk to all the parties and see could we move forward. Now, in that situation, if it was still stalemate, yes, you'd probably call an election. At that stage, the public would probably be saying, we don't like this, but this is the best way forward because we want government. Yeah. Now, after a while, after 2 or 3 months, the public will become totally impatient. If we're parallel.
The public are already getting a little bit impatient.
But there comes a point when you need legislation to be passed, and technically speaking, we could pass legislation as we are. I was asking the other day, the written down questions will come up soon. And
well, Leo Varadkar is still technically the Taoiseach.
Well, there's one thing in our situation, and again it's different from Northern Ireland for obvious reasons. We are a sovereign state. So there has to be a government there. Always, every day, every minute, every day. So until the Dáil elects, the minute that the Dáil elects a new Taoiseach, he acts as Taoiseach, and the government acts as minister, and cabinet meetings will take place, and decisions can be made. And I was part of a very short interregnum. And if you look, for example, at the TOO scheme, it was announced in the budget, but I worked up literally to the last day to get the TOO scheme up. Now, it's not exactly the way I wanted it to be, but at least I got the scheme in place. It could be improved. So you work absolutely as minister to the last day, and then you walk out and somebody else takes over.
Okay.
Now, Eamon, you made some comments in relation to Fine Gael, in that you said you wouldn't be happy to go into government with Fine Gael. I mean, surely that the same applies, I mean, in relation to Sinn Féin. I mean, is that still your position, that you wouldn't be happy to go into government with Fine Gael?
Oh yeah, absolutely, because look at the last 9 years. As all the points we were talking about at the beginning of the programme, that the in my experience of it, they lack in empathy with ordinary people that I'm dealing with. One person from a strong Fine Gael,
35,
but
so
they've gone from 76 seats down to 35 over two elections.
Yeah, with the two elections.
One person put it to me very well, and the person came from a very, very strong Fine Gael connection, and they said, look, Fine Gael run the country for the way people, they think people should be, and Fianna Fáil tradition around the country for the way people really are. And there's a certain modicum, in my view, of truth in this, in that anybody who sits long enough dealing with real people, with all the dilemmas and issues in their lives and so on, you have to become very tolerant of the reality of the human condition, which is a very contradictory condition. And there's good and bad in everybody and so on. And I find that there's quite a judgmental view on people and the situations they find themselves in. I always try to find out how they got to where they are, just so I can deal with the issues. But I never make any judgments. And I think that, for example, when I was doing all this work with prisoners and so on, and people keep saying, what's he in for? And it was mainly men, there was one or two women. I'd say that's not the issue. They're there, and they got the whatever sense they got. Yeah. That's where we're trying to go forward. Yeah. And everything in my life is, how do we go forward and make the life better for us?
We do go forward.
Actually, we're a lot more dynamic than we have now.
I actually, just on that, I think that's a really interesting point, because people often say, if you're in politics, and again, for us, I think it's very clear, we fell into the running part, we were involved in politics before that, but I suppose people always say, what, do you need to be like, do you need to have this qualification, or do you need that? But I think it was Jerry Adams who said to me years ago, he said, what you need to do is actually like people and have an empathy for people. And I think that's actually the core. You need to like people, and you need to understand that people, we'll all be in situations.
Surely you're not saying that the Fine Gael politicians don't like people.
No, I'm not saying that, but I think you need to have an empathy for people. And I think over time, you're always in situations and people tell you what situations they're in, and you take it with, these things don't faze you at all. It's about trying to help the person and seeing what can be done, and it does take away the kind of judgmental thing that an awful lot of people have. But I totally agree. I think Fine Gael, they don't get it because it's not the life that they live.
But sure,
so they don't understand.
But there's also, you don't have some sort of growing people.
It's amazing how ideas that on the surface would seem absolutely ridiculous to mountaineers, still in parts of our society, still hold good. There was a concept in Victorian times where they differentiated between the deserving poor and the undeserving poor. So a widow whose husband, because in those days the main breadwinners were the men, died in an unfortunate circumstance, would be deserving poor. But somebody who just couldn't work and was a bit, not together, right, would have been undeserving poor. And, but there is still, in parts of society, a bit of an attitude that, they wouldn't put it in those terms, because they're very Victorian terms. But more or less say, look, it's nearly their own fault. Yeah. And it's not as simple as that when you get to know these people.
It's like the thing that Leo Varadkar said when he first became Taoiseach, I'm there for the people that get up early in the morning. And I'll never forget, at the time, I was actually commuting down to work in Limerick, and I had to leave the house at 6 to be down, because I was starting at 7:30. And I just remember thinking, he said something about that he gets up and is able to go to the gym in the morning and then go into work, and I thought, Jesus, well, he clearly he doesn't have to get that up as early. Like, that's such a ridiculous concept to say that I'm there for the person that gets up early in the morning. To say that I'm only there for a certain type of people. If you're there for a Taoiseach, and it's even like us, some people voted for us, some people didn't vote for us. We still have to represent those people. You're there, if you're a Taoiseach, you should be there for everyone.
Yeah, I think actually that encapsulates it very, very well. That he was saying, I'm there for certain people.
Yeah.
And to me, you're there for everybody. But some people actually need more assistance than others.
Yeah.
And it might be through all sorts of reasons. And I think that is a basic philosophical difference.
Okay, well, Leo isn't here to defend himself, so I mean,
but he said that.
I absolutely understand that. But what I'd like to get at really is, we're in a bit of an impasse situation, and it could get very difficult, because people are taking positions which are utterly contrary to each other, and it seems to be hardening at the moment. So I mean, I'd love to know from both of you really, how are we going to move forward? How can we unlock? Because all of us want to see a strong government. I mean, personally, whether Fine Gael and Sinn Féin is quite unlikely. Fianna Fáil and Sinn Féin doesn't seem to be likely at the moment. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael doesn't seem to be likely, and it does seem to be that the maths are that it will need two of those three parties to coalesce in order to form a government. But how are we going to move forward towards this?
But I don't know, and it's beyond my pay grade, as they say.
Well, I mean, you're now our most senior representative, and you're just as relevant as anybody else in the.
To a point, but I think I made my view known. It's not the majority view within my party, and we'll park that for a minute.
And that would be that you would be willing to go into coalition with.
I would talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Right.
And it would depend on whether we were going to get the changes that I think are necessary and how far we'd all agree on where we need to go, and then you'd look at it. But that's not the majority.
Would you talk to Fine Gael?
Oh, I talk to anybody, but we've been talking to Fine Gael for the last 4 years, and look where we are: no houses, no health system
Just
that we
on that,
can't,
Eamon,
no
the
physiotherapist in Connemara, no physiotherapist, and no child nurses on the east side of Galway. I mean, the whole thing is crazy. So. We don't need to do too much talking. Now, the other thing is this, of course, when you're up in Leinster House, everyone talks to everybody. That's reality. And
On a one-to-one basis.
And in groups, and there's, on committees, there's total cooperation between all the parties. A huge level of cooperation. Now, obviously, you talk about strong government. The best government you could get would be a government that took firm action and managed to consistently persuade not only those who are in the government, but those who are not in the government, that the actions they're taking are genuine and for the good of society. And we do need changes, and no matter what government you put in place at the moment, it's going to, it's not going to be, in the terms of traditional governments, a strong government. But we had a strong government, an incredibly strong government with an overwhelming majority from 2011. 2000.
Yeah, and I mean, the inter-party government in the 40s.
They were weak governments. Both
So,
of them
Eamon, can I
collapsed.
pull you back
But
for
what
a
I'm saying
second?
is, they were incredibly strong. They could steamroll you,
Right.
right? And they abused it. And no better place now than, for example, the way they treated the Gaeltacht. When they passed, steamrolled the bill through without debate. And we all walked out of the door. The whole opposition walked out of the door as a result. So, strong government is about bringing the Dáil and the people with you. It's not about just mustering the numbers and marching the troops through and not engaging in debate. That's not strong government. That's not good
So
government.
just to pull you back a second on housing, because it's seen as probably the biggest issue at the moment, and even the LH on
It
Friday
and
night-
health and
it and health,
also.
but even on Friday
And
night,
environment, I'll
it was
get my
both-
spoken for
I
that
would
as well.
say, okay, but you got to pick one, and the one we're hearing the most about at the moment is housing.
It is
So
certainly
at
the biggest
moment-
issue according
at
to the
moment,
public, I believe.
We've had Sinn Féin saying they'll build 100,000 houses over the next 5 years. Fianna Fáil came up with a figure as well, Eamon. Was it 50,000 or 75,000?
But I think that was a
we could
different.
argue the figures, but
Just to go on for that, Maireád, the point was made that at the moment, isn't there a plan in place to build between 24 and 25,000 houses this year? And if that continues on, it should be 125 over 5 years. So if housing is seen as probably the major issue, no matter what government that goes in,
Well,
no matter
look,
if they solve the housing crisis,
when I was
They won't be popular.
well, yeah, but
they won't be popular.
The reason being
That's
that, like, if you were told
Mhm.
in 2011 that the very bitter and hard medicine we put in place to right the economy was going to bear dividends,
Yes.
lots of people would say, well, if you do that, everyone will love you. But of course, life keeps moving on. So today's problems are not tomorrow's problems. So the real challenge for government is, how do you deal with all of the different problems coming down the track? And one thing I always remember, in 2007, the world looked a very rosy place in terms of
That's right.
economy. And you might remember, lots of people have forgotten that the first cloud that appeared on the horizon was Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae.
It was the banking crisis,
Okay.
yeah.
No, but it was Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae specifically.
Yeah, and we have
And
clouds at the moment.
No, but Northern Rock followed on after that. And nobody, I remember ringing back to Dublin and saying, are we in any way exposed to subprime and to all of this? And is this going to cause huge contagion? Because anybody, I happened to be it was the middle of summer, I think it was August, and I was just away on a 2 weeks holidays, and I picked up the phone and rang people in the Taoiseach's advisors, and I said, look, how much of a threat is this going to be to us? For two reasons I was worried. When the sky's too blue, something's going to go wrong. That might
You think
sound
the sky is blue now, do you?
that's actually
No.
really interesting.
Great to me.
And the second thing was that, America is a huge economy.
Yeah.
Now, we now know that
Yeah.
what I was told was
No, true.
wrong.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's actually interesting because it's funny. I was 17 in 2007, so I'm born 1990, so it's easy to. And I was 18 then in 2008, doing my leaving cert, all that.
Mhm.
And I ended up studying economics again because I went in and it's like the politics of today, really.
Yeah.
And I ended up studying. I did a master's in finance and was in risk management and financial regulation. And it's funny hearing that now because my whole studies for like a 5-year period was about the banking crisis, and we were constantly hearing about Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, and it's funny now to see, it's interesting to hear the other side of things, because to me, obviously, when I was 17, I didn't realise at that point how big that was going to be, and then reading back on it. But it's interesting how you were there when it happened and everyone thought it was going to be fine. Hindsight's a great thing. I studied then how it ended up.
Well, that's it.
How it
And
was so clearly linked.
we have the coronavirus now. It looks like it could be potentially a big issue in the world. And we don't know whether that's going to be contained over the next 3 months.
But
And we don't know if it's going to be a disaster.
But even as we sit here, I was talking to somebody who's in the tourism business and brings people in from the United States of America. Now, whether coronavirus works out to be a big problem or not, already apparently...
It is in China, obviously.
No, but in America, apparently, it's having big effect already on people's decision about travelling because they're afraid that if you get on a random plane, that a random other person might be on the
Well, I've been
plane.
in Dublin Airport and there's people with masks everywhere, in Dublin,
But,
let alone
so
other countries.
it's not only Caesar's Gallic War Part 3.
No,
He made the famous statement, it's not only war, but the rumour of war.
I know.
That caused the chaos.
I know,
Yeah,
and
it
we've
does,
seen the
yeah.
markets reacting, and we've seen, for example, in Italy now they've got fairly punitive legislation coming through because they're suddenly seeing a potential disaster unfolding. And that's a European country. I mean, the possibility is we
but
may
it's
be
not
facing
only,
this in
but
the
it's
next
not
3
only
months.
whether for coronavirus comes to Ireland or not, but it's very likely it'll have effect on people's decisions, importing goods from China and so on, so on. So I think we overestimate. For example, if we took a global look at it, malaria is killing a lot more people than coronavirus will probably ever kill, but it doesn't affect the same people.
Yeah.
And it doesn't affect the people with the economic clout and with the money to spend or whatever. Therefore, that does not affect our economies every day. Whereas coronavirus, because of its nature, because of mobility of people, and because it's avoidable if you don't come into contagion with it, could cause a huge disruption, for example, to our tourism industry.
That's very interesting, and it makes sense that people are already saying that they won't travel to Ireland because of that, or leave the US. That's interesting, and then that'll have a knock-on effect.
But if you go to the west coast of the US and the amount of Chinese people there, right? So you can see how the interactions happen, how people are getting a bit
but the
nervous.
difficulty with all these issues is, 3 months down the line, we might say, oh well, coronavirus, it's grand, it's under control,
But
forget
there'll
about
be
it.
there'll
But
be
the possibility, there's always something will come. I mean, it could be Brexit, which is going to disrupt
Could
our
be the
situation.
Middle East.
We don't know. It could be the Middle East. There could be war in the
Well,
Middle
I tell
East.
you, actually, I was working in collateral management in derivatives, right? It's just moving. So
Good luck to you
for
with that.
collateral, right?
Yeah.
No, but we weren't expecting Brexit, right? And it was mad. People always say to me, things affect the market and whatever. But that next day, I tell you, we had to go in early because we had a huge amount of collateral to move. Things do affect the market like that for sure.
And something, as sure as we're all here, anybody who thinks that you're going to create a certain world, the only guarantee in human activity is total uncertainty, and that things come from the most unexpected sources and have the most unexpected impacts. And therefore, and in the meantime, notwithstanding all of that, we have to build the houses and whatever. So the trick is, can you provide the basic service of health, housing, whatever, during upturns and downturns? That actually is our challenge, and it can be done.
Okay.
If that's about sharing internal wealth, it's not about external wealth.
Excellent. So we've got a couple of questions and comments coming in because we have a lot of regular viewers, and there's one, just bringing it back to housing again. Caroline Stanley has made the point. She said it's the type of houses which are being built. If they were unaffordable to most people, then housing still remains a problem.
that is.
And she's just on about houses. The last bit there, right, is that a report in one of the papers today talking about high-end apartments in Dublin lying idle because they're too expensive expensive and how the rich you must be.
Well, actually, when we were talking about housing, I don't think I actually came in on the housing part, but I do think that's the thing. I put in a question when I was on the city council on how many houses have been built, and in Galway City, public houses, and there had been none built in a 10-year period. And I think that's the problem. If you're not consistently dealing with issues, then it's going to be a problem next. And then obviously the affordability of houses. So what we need obviously is social housing, but we also need affordable housing. So many of my friends, the thought of being able to own your own home it's just not real. It's not real. And if you are, then, people talk about getting married. Well, I tell you, getting a mortgage is, it's very hard to get out of that. So really it's a situation where you can only really get a house and a mortgage if you're a couple, and then, people end up living at home and then trying to move straight into getting a mortgage and that. And so many people, if they are talking about getting a mortgage, they have to live at home for a period of time, and that can only be then if they're able to do that. And for so many people, that's not real. Realistic opportunity. And then there's the situation of people renting and paying huge rents to live in.
It used to be a third of income.
And now people are basically living to pay. People are basically working to pay their rent. And then there's the whole concept of being totally unsure. Your landlord has so much power in the sense that, if your landlord says now that you have to move, there's this constant fear. People aren't asking their landlords to fix things that are broken because they're just so worried that they're going to have to leave the house. But I think that whole thing, it's not a realistic opportunity for most people now to be able to ever own their own home.
But we then need to decide why are houses unaffordable? Or why used to be affordable? And the first thing is land has become disproportionately scarce and costly. So the cost of the site is a huge issue for affordability for people who are in ordinary jobs. And when I'm talking about ordinary jobs, I'm talking about Gardaí and civil servants and nurses and also people in quite well-paid jobs. And where you've got two incomes, unlike long ago, one income. The second issue is that we have increased the specification for houses quite rightly. In terms of quality of building and so on, and building regulations have increased. So if we do that, we must also say if we want people to live in really good quality houses, that's a fine thing to do, but we have to look at it. Now, it's very interesting when you go back. I remember people explaining to me, we say in the 30s, where in rural Ireland, the grant was equivalent to all the materials in the house.
Okay.
So they used to then get a medal of all the neighbours and they'd build a house. And in that way...
That is going back now.
Yes, it is, but...
We can't do that right now.
Well, sorry.
Or it's not easy to do
in today's thinking, to give the person the full value of the materials would be considered totally revolutionary. But I'm saying it actually happened. Now, on the other hand, we built a lot of social houses. They were good quality at the time compared to what had been there previously, the slums or whatever. A lot of them were places like Bowmore and so on.
And in fairness to Fianna Fáil, that was the only
but the other one,
but
even if I move forward to more modern times,
social houses.
If you built a house, if you built your own, if you bought a purchase house, or you built your own house, we say in the 80s, you got marital tax relief. In other words, you were paying tax relief at 46%. You got the relief at 46%. You also got tax relief on all the interest you paid in credit cards and everything. It's actually quite extraordinary how. So that meant if you topped up the loan on the house with another loan, because often things are a little bit dearer than you expect, you got that, and there was a €3,000 grant for building a house. Now you can take €3,000 when a house was costing, say, 25,000 in the early 80s, late 70s, and figure out when a house is costing 200,000 what kind of a grant that's equivalent to, right? So we subsidised housing hugely from the state kitty. Now, the argument in favour of that is quite substantial, in that if I build a social house, and I'm very for building social house for those who have no income and can't afford them any other way, if I build what we term a social house now, what would have been called a local authority house, and pay the full cost, that's fine if that needs to be done. But for those people who can make a significant contribution, I think there's nothing wrong with ceding the ownership totally to the person on conditions. There were conditions attached to you couldn't sell and so on in the short term. And if you sold a house, you lost your mortgage relief and so on. So attaching conditions like that to it, but giving them full ownership. But we make everything too complicated now.
Yeah.
And the proof of the pudding is, if we look at the history of housing in the 20th century in Ireland, where we went from the worst slums in Europe to a situation that 80% of people owned their houses, and those in social houses eventually got an opportunity if they got jobs as well. I think we have to say what went wrong. What went wrong in our thinking, and this goes back to the debate we had earlier about different strands of thinking within our society about helping people, and what I would call a level of begrudgery in giving anything to anybody.
That's true. But actually, just interestingly, I just think, it's also attitudes, and we do very much in this country. It's that people want to own their own home, and I think that also is because, with renting, there's a huge, you're unsure of how long you can rent and all that kind of thing. But my mother is from Berlin, and in Berlin, everyone rents, but you rent for your whole life. You stay in this one place, and there's absolute security of tenure. That's another thing. And again, they went through World War II, and they managed to be able to house their people. But and then of course there's a question you were talking about, scarcity of land and all that. And obviously there is then a situation where we will have to look to a certain extent of building up, which we do have in the likes of Berlin, and people live in flats all their lives in Berlin. My grandparents would never have owned their flat in Berlin. They lived there, and my granny lived in the same street.
But I often wonder how much our history.
Well, I think it is, but I think it's our mindset.
Yes, but I don't think you should discount the impact. The big fight to get the ownership of the land. There was a point made, and there's two reasons why I like the point in terms of stability, that private ownership is fine as long as there is a diffuse ownership of private property. In other words, that most people manage to own something, that it's not concentrated in the hands of the few. The corporatization of the ownership of housing leaves me cold, I have to say, except for those who are very well off.
Why on earth are we not doing something about it?
I agree, but you have to first of all decide what you would like. The second thing, of course,
is always the problem.
A practical issue.
Everybody has solutions.
You
have solutions, but it doesn't mean your party agrees with them.
Well, no, but I'm entitled to my view.
We all are.
Yeah, we are, and I believe there's no point being in a party and being a zombie in a party. You have to try and move your party, and there were things the party came along with me on over the years that I think were quite significant. But we need to also recognise that when you own your house, in terms of all sorts of other borrowings and other things in your life, that is a useful collateral to have, and has often been used in Irish society, whether you're borrowing to help a child or whatever. That issue.
But I want to take Mairead's point. She was talking about the rental situation, and in fairness, Sinn Féin were one of the, Sinn Féin and the more left-wing parties, the Greens, Social Democrats, were the ones who were highlighting the issue of the plight of renters, because that seems to be the pressure point for many people in our society at the moment.
The reality is, it's extremely difficult if you're renting to be saving for a mortgage. I think it's impossible. I don't know anyone that is. I genuinely actually don't know anyone who has successfully, from my own friend group, been able to buy after doing that. So I think that's a huge issue. But I also I totally agree with what you're saying. I do think we have a mentality which is totally different to, say, Germany, that we do want to own our own homes, and that definitely is a historical thing. But I do think we need to make sure that for those who are renting, because that's a reality at the moment, that there isn't this constant fear that could be thrown out.
Because you can never get from the situation that Mairead describes to the situation you're describing if simply you've got no chance to build up capital, if you're constantly playing catch up. Absolutely accept it. But what's also very interesting, and I'm sure Mairead has come across the same thing, that people who are on this housing assistance payment, where there's meant to be some kind of security and so on, all of those are in every week looking to get into housing owned by a local authority, because they know that there will be security of tenure in that renting. So there's renting and renting. And the renting preferred by most people who require local authority housing, or your social housing as they call it now, is if you give them a choice between HAP and
a local authority house.
Yeah.
8 out of 10, as long as they're not being put into an area with high dysfunctionality. 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 would rather to get the safe, secure house.
And
as I said, the only case where I get anything different is where they're going into an area with, that might have a problem with drugs or whatever, antisocial behaviour, but allowing equal stability in the two areas.
Yeah.
They go for the security of tenants.
Well, again, and that's the point that you were making earlier, that we are just too reliant on the private sector. That's where we are at the moment.
So we've had a few comments coming in here, and as always, the odd like comment is nice, and we have a comment here that is very distressing for us all, because it's from Tommy Roddy, who we know is a candidate in the 2024 elections, he's pointed out to us, and he's leaving the European Union today, and he's calling it Rexit. So that's Tommy's exit from the scene.
What, he's exiting?
Rexit. He's Roddy exits from the European Union.
Well, how does he do that
make
now?
all the papers
Without
tomorrow,
leaving the
quite
country?
sure. Well, who knows?
Yeah.
Will he be around in 2024?
Yeah.
Tune in next week, folks. Okay, the next one is from Paul Campbell, the regular contributor, and he's a very interesting one here. He said, perhaps after the interview, Mike and Neil, who both play tennis, could suggest a game of doubles to the two TDs. No, I think it's interesting.
I've never been good at tennis.
Well, he's played on one exhibition versus a
I've never been good at tennis or bowling.
Bowling and tennis.
Not good bowling, not
Not
strong.
good
Well, Mairead,
And I'm
I
not
can
good at
recommend a very good
basketball
tennis
either.
coach, but that's a different side of it.
What is your sport,
Well,
Mairead? What's your best sport?
I like to swim.
That's good.
Yeah.
Swimming is good.
I was never picked for the basketball team because I was too short.
But swimming and bowling.
Apparently, still short people can. But
Actually, we'll all head down and jump off the thing in Sea Point, will we?
Yeah.
Well, before you do that, I think
I'll
Paul
watch
Campbell's
you.
point's interesting. If you think of this for a coalition, Fianna Fáil, Sinn Féin, the Greens and Independents. We'd see how that would work. And then the other one, on a more serious level, from Gina Mack, who's been into us a few times. She said, what about people with disabilities, i.e. PA hours, lack of funding for people's needs, especially people who are visually impaired, and blind people often get forgotten about? Mairead, what would you think of that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And again, I think it comes back to what we were talking about earlier. To me, to me, there's policies, and we do have policies, but it is also a way of thinking, and it's the fact that what you need to do is put the ordinary person front and centre in the way you look at politics, and that'll change things for everyone. To make it a more equitable society. That's what I think we want to do. I think the reality is that Fine Gael don't have that empathy and work for a certain type of person. I think that's the huge issue. But 100%, I mean, I don't have the figures on me now, but we do want to increase the PA hours definitely. And I think one thing that kept coming up, or something that was interesting from the different hustings and that we did, was even just a simple thing of a hearing aid and how it's totally out of
You
cost.
said they're very expensive.
They're extremely expensive, and my mother is a lecturer, but she uses hearing aids, and they're so expensive for most people to be able to.
Did you say 8,000 or something like that?
I think it's like between 3,000 and 8,000 that they can be, and for people to be able to work, like my mother without her hearing aids wouldn't be able to work. So I think that kind of thing. It's just absolutely
It's a shocking amount of money,
it's
isn't it?
shocking amount. Like 8,000 for a hearing aid.
crazy.
Yeah,
They're
when you
easy enough to
consider
break.
mobile
They're
phones
very,
Exactly.
they're
That's
very,
complex.
very easy to break. You could sit on them easily,
And
like
there you go. So,
Yeah.
I mean, what's your opinion on it?
I think totally you have to provide people with the ability to live as fulfilling a life and as active a life as possible. Now, one thing that I remember, I introduced a partial capacity scheme. Now, what that basically meant was that if you were on an invalidity pension, and we were to introduce it then for disability loans, that depending on how degraded your disability, that you could then keep all, part, or quarter of it, or none of it, but that you'd automatically get back an invalidity pension if the job dried up.
Yes.
But that if, for example, you had a severe disability, and there are people I know who have got this, you could keep the whole invalidity pension and earn as much as you could earn, quite legally, with no question. So the idea was to help people to fulfil themselves, not work for work's sake, but to fulfill themselves, obviously improve their income as well. But also, one thing became obvious. I asked the head medical officer in the department, who was a fantastic person, had he any evidence on the damage done by being unemployed to people's health? And he came back with a 2-pager. He said all the medical evidence is that people who are forced unemployed suffer, much higher morbidity, die younger, go to the doctor more often. But that the great thing is that when you re-engage somebody in activity or in work, whatever, it's a 99% cure. So one of the things that we have to do is see how we allow everybody fulfill themselves to their ability. Now, I was in the unusual situation, and people often kind of overlook this, even though they know the facts, that when I was growing up from about 1951, 52 on, my grandfather had very, very limited vision. He could do mathematics with my sister, who wound up a professor.
It's the same in De Valera. Different.
He could do it on a big blackboard, but he couldn't recognise faces, and so on. Now, obviously, he had great PAs, right, because he was teaching.
You're letting all the secrets out now.
No, but one thing he had, right, and when you were dealing with him, we never taught him of being seriously visually. We knew not to leave things on the floor because of toys on the floor or anything like that. But we didn't see him as being a disabled person. I absolutely guarantee you, his mind was so sharp, his memory was brilliant. But he did have good assistance. But it shows you how, literally, if you gave people enough support, how you can get a fantastic quality of life, and how you can make a huge contribution equally, despite a disability. And it's one thing, they've done so many studies in the poor man, but this was one that nobody's ever looked at, is just how he dealt with what was a severe disability and overcame it. Now, the reality is that we need to invest like that. Now, there's another problem I keep coming across, and that is where you get people who have a severe disability who will never, ever get insurable employment. And their parents make provision for them. Or maybe in their will leave the estate to all the family, and the person with disability inherits their share of what was the family house when it's sold and all the rest. Reality is, if they get €100,000, which is not an awful lot to last your lifetime with a bit of extra comfort, they actually lose the whole disability allowance. And they can't blame them for not having the contributions up, because
there's many anomalies still there like that.
But when you raise that, what annoys me is, if somebody says, look, Eamon, we recognise this and we must change it, and we're looking at ways to do it, I say, well, okay, we'll take the time, we'll work it out to not get unintended consequences. But when you're told that's the way it is, and you get an answer back from the minister again and again and again.
Well, they say politics is the art of the possible. Absolutely. And what we are looking at right now, I mean, there's lots and lots of issues out there, but I think what's sort of exercising the public minds, and we're coming to the end of our show now, and I'd like to just sort of focus minds, if possible, really just in terms of how do we get any sort of government in place to deal with these sort of issues, because at the moment it looks like we're in the, people have described it as the dance of a thousand veils, that people are posturing. But positions seem to be hardening.
One thing we haven't actually talked about is the fact that the Labour Party are refusing to, have said that they don't Now,
is that relevant in terms of numbers?
Well, do you know what? If it is relevant, I think. I think that if we had this whole thing of everyone saying, vote left, and people did vote. At the end of the day, people vote for people.
But there isn't a left government there, quite clearly, because
what would have been interesting actually from the other side of the house, and I'm sure Maireád wouldn't have objected, if the beneficiary parties of the vote left, vote Sinn Féin, vote left, which were Labour, Social Democrats.
Yeah.
Well, Labour are down now. Labour have gone from
yes, we understand that, but they still have 6
seats. No, but I'm saying is that Labour and those, yes, but they wouldn't have got any seats hardly if they hadn't got the spillover transfers. So, to a certain extent, I was surprised, and it shows you the problem with the so-called left when they couldn't all consolidate together and get a big bloc together. But that's just the way it is. Now, I wouldn't consider the Green Party as a left-wing party.
Even though Eamon Ryan clearly positioned himself as left-wing.
I would say that we're left to centre.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely true. Roger Hearn is the greatest socialist ever known to.
Well, some of us would be, and some others would have a slightly different view.
Yeah.
I think
it's a broad church.
It's a broad church.
As is Sinn Féin. I mean, I presume Sinn Féin is not.
Of course, it's a broad church on loads of different things, but I think our policies are very clearly left wing. So I think I definitely think that we're a left wing party, and I think that from the TDs and that I know, they're most certainly left wing.
But anyway, to get back to the question, I mean, how do you see this impasse being broken at the moment, Maireád? Is there any way it can be broken?
Well, again, it comes back to what we've been saying all along. I think if people actually sit down and talk, that's the only way it's going to go forward. Mary Lou has said that she's going to continue speaking to the likes of Soc Dems, independence and all that, and see what can be done.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously we have a situation at the moment where Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael aren't willing to speak to us, so we're going to continue speaking with the others that remain.
So surely, Eamon, your government, the one that you're dreading, the Fianna Fáil Fine Gael government, is the only one that's possible if nobody actually speaks to anybody else.
Obviously, that's not possible either unless the Greens or somebody else,
Yeah.
or a number
Or
of somebody
independents.
else's. You'd want an awful lot because we, at the moment, have 72 seats because we don't
Between
have
Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael.
Yeah, because we lost.
And you need
Fianna Fáil.
80 or 81.
Well, look, in reality, you need 83 or 84.
Of course you do, because
Any
your
kind of-
by-election
Yeah.
is people.
But you phrased the question. You said, how do we put a government together to bring about this change? The problem is that there's a big difference between putting a government together and bringing about change, and that is the challenge for people like me. Would a government of certain hues bring about the kind of practical radical change
Yeah.
I want? So I want practical radical change that just improves the lives of the ordinary people, and I want it fast. And how are we going to get over the total inertia in the
Yeah,
system?
how do we move from where we are now?
And
to
therefore,
that?
it's not just a question of rushing to get a government
Yeah.
to say,
So
we now
you-
got a government, and then you say, oh my God,
Yeah.
they're just going to continue
Yeah,
on.
not rushing,
Yeah.
but we don't want to end up like the Belgian situation, where we have no government for a long, long time, or indeed we have the government we have.
I
Or
don't
we
think
have a
I think that's what
situation,
happened.
Neil, where Maireád alluded to earlier about Varadkar saying, look, I want to be in opposition, I don't want to be in it, and then trying to be seen as the white knight at the end. Will you have a situation where you have a government possibly throw it out there, Fianna Fáil, the Greens, the Soc Dems, Independents, supported by a confidence and supply arrangement with Fine Gael, and Fine Gael saying we had to do it because otherwise we did go back to the polls? What would you think of that? Is that a
But
possibility?
are the numbers even there for that, Mike?
Well, if you have, I'm assuming Fianna
Yeah, there
Fáil, the
would be.
Greens, the Independents, Soc
You'll
Dems.
have to have
But
the
have
confidence.
Soc
confidence.
Dems
Right.
not come out and said that they're not going to speak to Fianna Fáil or Fine
They'll
Gael?
talk to us,
So
but-
it's
There's
all
an
kind of
awful lot of
round
people
houses.
that won't speak to each other. It
Yeah,
seems.
so
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
it's a bit.
It's
bit
a
funny.
funny.
So surely, Eamon, people are going to have to start speaking to each other.
Yeah.
Yes, but all those things happen very suddenly at the end,
Yeah.
right? I think I could write the script, but I'm not going to.
Go on, go on.
No,
Well,
no,
that's
no,
fair.
No,
You're
I'm
better
not
off
gonna
not,
say-
yeah.
I'm not going to say it here today. But I
Bring
think
in George Mitchell.
I've
I
been
think
wrong
we-
long enough
I-
to say that I think I can write the script. There might be a few potholes on the particular road that I think will be travelled, but that's not the issue. In the end of the day, I'm more concerned about how we deal with, in a dynamic way, with the issues confronted by all the people I meet every day, and particularly by the people who need the most assistance from the state, whether they're ill, they're old, whether they're unemployed or whatever, right? And there's a big attitude issue involved here, as well as a decision-making issue involved here. And I think that's where we really need to have the debate. But that's not as good fun as the
I know.
guessing who's going to
I
win
know.
next Sunday's
Fantasy
Ah, well,
politics.
look, come on, we all
fantasy
know,
government.
everyone loves
That's a new
fantasy,
series
but,
deal for us.
if
Yeah.
you look at newspapers leading up to a major match, there'll be more time and column interest in
The
writing
build-up.
before.
Yeah, you're right.
than writing after.
But every sport, I think.
And then everybody
Yeah,
loves
Paddy
fantasy
Power
football.
in on the act as well.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, the formation. They
and it's
didn't
good.
get much right actually. Paddy Power
No,
nor
they
TG
didn't.
Carr
Yeah.
got much right.
Well, no, TG Carr didn't. I think Paddy Power had a more.
They're a little bit better where they go.
Not much.
TG Carr were totally
They were very
off.
better.
But I was actually happy enough when I was 7%, wasn't I?
Yeah,
That TG Carr poll?
7%.
Yeah.
I was happy enough because with a 4% margin of error,
Yeah.
11% would have been quite happy.
Yeah.
So
And what did you get in the end
I
actually?
think it was 14, was it?
14.
Yeah.
So the margin for error
Yeah, you got half
from
of it.
7
7.8 or
to
something.
yeah. So basically it was 7 at least.
Yeah.
The margin.
So
of
maybe
error.
before we wrap up, and because we have had some interesting
50%.
comments today, I might chew one out very, very fast and just get a quick word off you. So it's from Margaret Devon, and she says, in 1987 we got a county council loan of 16,000 to build our home at 14% interest, but also availed of a Department of Environment grant of 3,500, which helped immensely. We have since worked very hard and repaid this loan, but never thought we would live to see the day we'd have to borrow 80,000 to send both of our daughters to Teacher Training College in Limerick. Yet Leo Varadkar feels we should be able to fund deposits for our children's homes. Has he ever lived a day in the real world? So a brief comment from both of you.
I don't know how people afford to go to college with the fees that are there, and then also having to live away from home. When I studied 10-12 years ago, and I think it was like 1,000 and something the fees were, which was already very expensive, and I got to live at home because I lived at home through college, obviously because it was in Galway. But then if somebody's maybe from rural Mayo and wants to come to study medicine or something specific that needs to be studied in Galway, say, I just don't know how people would afford it. I mean, that's obviously something that
I think the answer is, in many cases, and
They can't,
working
sure.
here in the college, they don't.
Yeah,
Do you know? And the reality is people are giving up because they can't afford it, and people are moving abroad again because simply they can't afford to live.
People, if they're studying, who need a job and need to be working in that, and then obviously that's puts huge mental strain on people as well to try and juggle everything at a young age, you know.
But then the question is, and this is a debate, the job. If I pointed you as Minister of Education and I gave you 20 million extra for subsidising and facilitating third level university and IT fees, how would you spend it? Now, my view is if you start spending some of the money on people on 3 and 4 and 500,000, you're denying that money to people on 50,000 or 60,000, so on. So what I would like to see is a radical increase in the income limits that apply, rather than just say we'll abolish it for everybody, including those who are super rich, because that every euro you pay them is a euro less for those who need it more.
Yeah. Okay.
So I have a big philosophical issue there. That, for example, I'm going to give another.
You're
example.
opening a big debate here.
Yeah, but no, but it is a
Careful
big
on this.
debate because, for example, the last government decided to give every child up to a certain age a GP card.
Yeah.
But they're refusing medical cards to kids with serious disabilities. Now, as far as I'm concerned, we should have given the children and the parents of those children with serious disabilities the medical card away quicker than giving the healthy children
so
GP
targeted
card.
approach. In other
Well,
words.
you've only
Prioritising.
the one thing you learn when you're in government, there's always limited finances. So you have to make sure that those that need it most get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a very socialist view, but I have a very socialist view of that.
Good. Okay. Well, we're surrounded by socialists here today, which is great.
That reminds me of when you did the election there, the British election, and you know we were totally in our own bubble because I don't know if anyone else, but like according to my Twitter, Jeremy Corbyn was going to run lead away. You know, sometimes we can be in a kind
that's
of a
not the
bubble.
reality.
No,
That's
that
not the
was
reality.
not
If I
the
listen to
reality.
Go on Police Library, we call it right. And then is that right?
Absolutely. But look, you know, I think we should wind up the debate at that. I mean, we're not
Okay,
going to
thank
form a government here today, but what we have
No.
done
It'll be an interesting one.
is we've highlighted many issues, and I would certainly think that you know, I can see Eamon and Maireád as local TDs, you know, look like they're going to be well able to work together, regardless of the formation of government. And I mean, I think that's a good thing because I think a broad church is
Well,
very
the
important.
reality is you have to work with, even if you know, on a local level, you have to work with everyone because if you want the best for, you know, it's just the way it is. I know on
The best
Galway
for the
City
people
Council,
at the end of the day.
on Galway City Council, there was always unlikely. It was the unlikely person that you wouldn't think you would work with, that you'd work with best because they tell you straight out if they agree or disagree. It was the people that you thought might support you who just flip.
As Eamon will tell you, sometimes it's your own people who are the most difficult ones to work with.
And in life in general, I hate the exclusion zone approach to life. And when I go up north now, I'd often, as I said, be visiting the prisons, where I'd be visiting. We have visited the loyalists, but mainly the Republican prisoners in Macabry. There's actually a very small number there, thankfully. It's only 11 at the moment. And then I would maybe meet representatives of the DUP party the same day. And I see no contradiction in that. I think that for too long, the politics of exclusion and say you can't talk to, you know, make reps for families of people who are in prison or whatever, even, you know, and I'm talking about right across for no matter what reason, is wrong. Everybody should be treated as a human being, and we shouldn't have places that, you know, people that you're not allowed to talk to by some, you know, diktat of society. I think that is exclusion is the most dangerous thing ever, and we've seen that right across the world. When you exclude groups, you create a bigger problem than when you actually talk to everybody. But that doesn't mean you agree. It means you give the human courtesy to talk.
Okay. So final word to you, Maireád.
On what? The final word to me, I suppose. Look, I mean, obviously for me, I hope that this is the start of some things being done differently. I hope, obviously I'm socialist, and I hope that, what we move forward, that we have a more equitable society, and I hope that this is the start of many elections that see the left wing doing well in elections. So we'll see. I hope this isn't just one election. The reality is this could just be one election and then people revert back. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, let's hope there's not too many elections in quick succession like we had in the 80s.
Yeah.
Anyway, listen, thank you very much indeed,
you.
Mairead, for joining us today. Thank you very much, Eamon. And a very interesting conversation. And certainly if we get half the things done that you guys were talking about, fixing the housing problem, fixing problems for people with disabilities and so on, certainly we will be seeing a better future. So, Mike,
well,
last word to
I'd
you
have to
first.
echo that, and I'd have to wish our two deputies the best of luck in the 33rd Dáil.
Thank you.
And I hope a government is formed pretty soon, and I hope it's a government that lasts and things go better. So thank you both very much
Thank
for
you
coming in
very
today.
much.
Congratulations again.
Thanks.
And we'll see you back on Galway Live Politics Live pretty soon.
Yeah, and thanks to our audience for sticking with us, and we'll
And thank
talk
you
to you
to
again.
Aaron Assan for sound.
Okay, so it's a wrap, Aaron, so thank you very much indeed.